The Oklahoma Sooners take on Texas in the Red River Shootout. It's been an eventful up and down year for OU. Helping us break all things Oklahoma, our good friend Parker Thune of Oklahoma Insider. He's also the radio voice on the Ref Sports there in Norman, does the Oklahoma football pregame show. And I've been lucky enough to join him in a couple Oklahoma game days this football season. Parker, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much for doing this.
Of course, Chris, never a problem. It's the best week of the year here in the Sooner State. And I would imagine, there's a lot of varied football allegiances down in the Lone Star State, but for that Texas fan base, doesn't get much better than this either.
Parker, I want to jump into first before we get in the Red River Shootout and talk about that game in Dallas. Just what you've seen from Oklahoma to this point, because I feel like if you'd have told any Sooners fan, hey, you're going to be 4-1 after 5 games, I'm not sure that many would have turned that down. However, Parker, it's kind of how you've gotten here, right? With, the drama at the quarterback position. There was even drama in non-conference play and some of those games being much closer than expected. You come down to the wire, obviously, against the Auburn Tigers, we were just talking about off air. So, what's the overall mood and vibe right now in Norman, Parker, and your overall thoughts on this football team? What's impressed you? What surprised you? Just how do you gauge this football team right now?
Man, it's truly bizarre, Chris. It really is, because you're exactly right. Oklahoma sits here at 4-1, and yet the eye test would tell you that's not a 4-1 football team. Even so, the one loss on the schedule so far, of course, that home loss to Tennessee. I mean, if you omit Jackson Arnold's 3 turnovers from that contest, there's a very good chance Oklahoma wins that one too. So it's really, really hard to figure what this team actually is and what they're capable of in 2024. And this 3-week stretch, I think, is going to tell us a ton about OU football and exactly what they are indeed capable of moving forward, because you got to go down to the Cotton Bowl in Dallas this weekend. You got to face Texas, the number 1 team in the nation. That's always the biggest game on Oklahoma's schedule. This rivalry is obviously one of the most significant in college football, and more than that, it generally shapes the remainder of the season for both of these programs. But then you got to come back home to face South Carolina. That's a very winnable game and also a very losable game. And then you go to Oxford to take on Ole Miss, which, look, Ole Miss is by no means invincible. They just lost on their home field a couple weeks ago to Kentucky. So, again, that's a game you can win, and then that's also a game you could very well lose. So that's kind of the nature of the beast in the SEC right now. It's really cool and really enjoyable, I think, for a lot of these OU fans. Because, look, that's not to say that OU fans didn't enjoy their status in the Big 12 for years and years and years, where you're just running roughshod on the conference and you're waltzing into the Big 12 championship game year in and year out. But it makes things a lot more riveting when every single week you really have no idea whether you're going to walk out of that building with a win or with a loss. And if the current parity in the SEC wasn't evident enough before last weekend, it certainly is now that Vanderbilt has toppled Alabama. So early impressions of the SEC for OU fans, I think on the whole, despite the team's struggles thus far through 5 games, have been much more positive than negative.
Parker, you mentioned the quarterback position. I want to jump there because admittedly it's still almost kind of hard for me to wrap my brain around the fact that Jackson Arnold, not that era is over, but this is fully probably Michael Hawkins' team at this point. I mean, what has the transition been like? Because, again, the entire offseason, I guess for me, Parker, it's like the entire offseason was spent building up Jackson Arnold, and it felt like Oklahoma was building around him, and that was their guy. And, I understand why they made the move, but, now it's Michael Hawkins' turn. And you saw him against Auburn late in the game do some things well, and the offense is obviously still a work in progress. But, obviously you use the bye week, Seth Luttrell, to put some things in, to build around him, to get him comfortable. What are you hearing? Because, again, you're as close to this program as anybody. What are you hearing in regards to the continued progression of the offense, specifically at the quarterback position with Michael Hawkins Jr.?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I've continued to hear, Chris, and something that's been whispered behind the scenes even since spring ball, and certainly during fall camp, is that for what Seth Luttrell wants to do offensively, Michael Hawkins is a much better fit. And man, OU did a lot of the RPO stuff early in the season because that's what Arnold was comfortable with. That's not how Littrell wants to call his offense. That's not a concept he wants to lean on. And so now that you have Hawkins calling the shots, you can go with a little bit more of a traditional air raid type attack, similar to what Littrell has done in the past during his time as OC at Arizona, at North Carolina, at Indiana. And man, with Hawkins, OU lucked into this kid, Chris. I mean, that's what it amounts to. And I truly don't know how much of this fan base knew what kind of a talent they had waiting in the wings, even while all off season they were talking up Jackson Arnold and they had full faith in Jackson Arnold. There was really no reason not to. I mean, I don't think anybody foresaw the frankly spectacular fall from grace that Jackson Arnold had at Oklahoma in the span of 4 weeks. Because it was all mental, never been a question of physical ability with him. That's why you figure, okay, if this season ends the way we expect it to end, he can go get in the transfer portal and go find a system that suits his game, and he'll have success. Like, the book isn't closed on Jackson Arnold by any means. But, man, and Michael Hawkins, if he's not on this roster right now, if you do not have him in Norman with this program, then you're probably turning things over to seventh-year senior Casey Thompson, who – is a solid quarterback, don't get me wrong, but especially coming off an ACL tear last year at Florida Atlantic, is that the guy you want to hitch your wagon to year one in the SEC, given the daunting schedule that you face? Man, Hawkins is a lightning rod, very polished passer, very effective and dynamic as a runner, as you saw in that Auburn game. And I said it just a few minutes ago, but it bears repeating. Oh, you really did luck into this kid, because not a whole lot of guys of his caliber were going to want to come to Oklahoma in the first place when Jackson Arnold was just one recruiting cycle ahead of him. But he's a legacy kid, always dreamed of playing at OU. And so once he got that offer, it was always going to be really, really hard for him to pick anywhere else. And he's just the ultimate competitor, man. Never took anything for granted, showed up with the impression that, okay, I have to go earn anything I get here before year 3, because this program is operating under their own impression that this is Jackson Arnold's team for at least the next couple of years. And to his credit, man, he went and earned it. He beat out Casey Thompson for the QB2 role. And I think what you've seen through 6 quarters of play from Michael Hawkins is that it's no fluke what he's been doing. There is a level, certainly there's talent there, but there's also a level of maturity and readiness that makes him well suited to step into this situation and run to the fire as a true freshman and not be daunted by the circumstances. 0 turnovers through 6 quarters, I think, is the most impressive statistic for a lot of people, because with where this Oklahoma defense is at, that's really all you need from your quarterback. Just don't crash the bus, if you will.
Parker, the Red River Shootout, regarded as one of the best rivalries in not just all of college football, but all of college sports in general. For someone, Parker, that's never been, I'm talking about myself, obviously, what makes this game so special? If you're trying to describe it to someone who's never experienced it, in person, who's kind of sparingly watched it over the years, can you put into words how special this game is?
Look, Chris, there are a lot of college football venues that I have not been to personally. There are a lot of outstanding rivalry series in college football that I have not experienced firsthand. But I feel like I can say pretty authoritatively, and anybody who has experienced this game would tell you the same thing, it is 100% unique. And we have to start with that is you have to understand the Cotton Bowl is a dump. The Cotton Bowl is not a great stadium. It's not in great shape. The facilities aren't what they need to be. The concessions are a mess. I think as the story goes, the bathrooms always get backed up during the games. And, man, it's a rundown venue in smack dab in the middle of the Texas State Fair, and it's just chaos and commotion everywhere. And amidst it all, you have a football game being played. And what I think, and you see it on the TV broadcast, it's not news to anybody, but being there and experiencing half burnt orange on one side and half crimson on the other, it's so special. And what makes it so special, I think, is that not only do you get that tension between the two fan bases, but you also get a scenario where for 3.5 hours, as long as the game's being played, there's never a moment of quiet in that stadium, because either half the stadium is on their feet or the other half is, or everybody is. Right? So the noise level, the noise factor at play in that football game, it's far supersedes what you would get on a typical college football Saturday, at least in terms of the sustained decibel level. And, it's kind of a beautiful disaster. And again, that goes back to the Cotton Bowl just being kind of a ragtag venue in the middle of a state fair. Man, it feels chaotic. It feels unconventional, but any OU fan or any Texas fan that experiences this game, especially on repeated occasions throughout the years, they come to understand that, man, that's just part of the experience. That's OU Texas for you. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm. So, Parker, as we look at this game, the #1 Texas Longhorns, what are the challenges you see that they present, and maybe some areas you think that Oklahoma maybe can exploit, maybe some battles they can win? Obviously, again, Texas, a 2-touchdown favorite in this game. I think I heard it's the second biggest spread in Red River Shootout history. Does it feel as daunting a task from what you've seen from Texas this year on the field, or do Oklahoma fans roll in with confidence because, again, there's some areas that they can take advantage of?
Well, listen, the house always wins, right? So far be it from me to question the bookmakers on those kinds of things. But I will say this. Again, if you have experienced this game, you come to realize that when those two teams hit the field, 90% of the time you have to throw out everything you know about these two programs, because something about that rivalry. Here's the analogy I'll make. Chris, you ever played the video game NFL Street? This is going back like 20 years. You ever played that game?
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. So, something about the way that game was built, something about the way that game was designed creates like this equalizing factor such that you can't blow somebody out in that game. It doesn't matter if you're really good at it and they're really bad at it. Something will happen along the way that levels the playing field, and you'll end up with a one-possession game at the end. And that's how it's been for years and years between these two programs in the Cotton Bowl. If you don't have a very obvious extenuating circumstance like OU did in 2022, when everybody kind of knew, okay, you don't have Dylan Gabriel active, you're going to take a beating, and they did. If you don't have a very obvious extenuating circumstance like that, this game ought to be a pick 'em every single year, because there's just something about this game, something about that setting, something about the way that these two teams detest each other and I guess just match one another's level of competition minute after minute, snap after snap for 60 minutes of gridiron action. Man, you look at this game over the last 10 years outside of that 2022 contest, it's been a one-possession game every year for a decade, Chris. Every single year for a decade. That's just, again, that's what part of what makes this rivalry special, is that regardless of how much of a discrepancy or how much of a chasm there seems to be on paper as far as the talent level or the quality of coaching between these two programs, you're going to get a knockdown, drag-out battle for 60 minutes in this game. Now, for Oklahoma, I think what's going to be critical is that they win the turnover battle. And if they can do that, now that's a very simple thing. I'm not going too deep, too nuanced with that take. But you have a guy at quarterback in Michael Hawkins that has yet to commit a turnover. You have a guy on the other side in Quinn Ewers who, experienced as he may be, he committed 3 turnovers in this game last year. He has demonstrated a propensity to put the ball in harm's way at times. I believe he turned the ball over twice in 2022, even though Texas did, of course, blow the doors off Oklahoma in that contest. So Quinn Ewers is gettable in that sense. And moreover, this Oklahoma defense has been highly opportunistic through 5 games, one of the best turnover margins in the country. When they get the opportunities to turn you over, they capitalize on them. And so, look, Texas has an outstanding skill position group. They've obviously got a triggerman with tons of experience. Quinn Ewers got north of 24 starts to his name. Michael Hawkins has 1, right? So the experience factor certainly plays in favor of the Longhorns, and they've got a strong defense as well. There's there's no obvious weakness with that football team. They're number one in the nation for a reason. And that doesn't mean they're not beatable, because everybody in college football is. But you're going to have to play 60 minutes of your best ball. And what's going to be key is that you do win the turnover margin, because if on at least a couple of occasions you can set your offense up with a short field, you can thwart prime scoring opportunities like Kendall Dolby did last year with a red zone pick of Quinn Ewers that really helped solidify Oklahoma's momentum in the early stages of that football game. That's the type of thing, Chris, that it's going to take for Oklahoma to slay the giant, as it were.
Parker, again, like I mentioned earlier, you're as close to that program as any, so maybe you can fill us in. What is the status of the health of the Sooners? Because that was a huge talking point going into that Auburn game. I joked, Parker, that Oklahoma's injury report looked like a CVS receipt, but it did. I mean, you had your top 5 wide receivers missing. Are we looking at a healthier Oklahoma football team in this game?
They are healthier. They are nowhere close to full health. They're going to get linebacker Desan McCullough back. That is a former top 100 recruit in the 2022 cycle, transferred to Oklahoma last year after spending a season at Indiana where his dad was on staff, played his best game of the year in this game back in 2023. He has yet to see the field in 2024, been battling a foot injury since fall camp. He's going to be good to go. The Sooners are also going to get back another true freshman that has been highly impactful through 5 games, and that's running back Taylor Tatum, who was the number 1 running back in the country in the 2024 recruiting cycle. He's proven, or I should say did prove through 4 games before he had to sit out the Auburn game due to a minor injury that he was dealing with. I think he proved through the first 4 games that he offers the most juice out of the backfield. And the Sooners kind of need a guy right now in that backfield that can create for himself, given the fact their offensive line has been mediocre at best, generally speaking, to this point in the year. And so you get those 2 back. The problem is you're still down your top 5 wide receivers. Jaden Gibson is out for the year, suffered a knee injury in fall camp that required surgery, so he's been on the shelf a while. Andrell Anthony still hasn't fully recovered from the ACL injury that he suffered in this game a year ago. Jalil Farouk still working back from a broken foot suffered in the season opener. Nick Anderson hasn't been all right. He hasn't been right all year, played 5 snaps against Tennessee, and then exited the game, hasn't been seen since. So he's unavailable, as is Deion Burks, the outstanding electric Purdue transfer that leads Oklahoma in pretty much every statistical category among wide receivers. I mean, he's outpaced and outperformed and outproduced all of Oklahoma's other wide receivers combined to this point in the year. So that's going to be the challenge for Michael Hawkins in particular. I mean, if it isn't already a daunting enough task for a true freshman to go into an environment like the Cotton Bowl against the number 1 team in the nation as a double-digit underdog, second career start, hey, go win this football game. And also your top 5 wide receivers are all on the shelf. Man, I've seen this kid enough over the years not to doubt what he's capable of, but it's going to be a tall order because you're dealing with a bunch of second and third stringers lining up at wideout. And the Sooners still have talent. Right? They still have J.J. Hester, who had a big game against Auburn. Brennan Thompson, himself a former Texas Longhorn, one of the absolute fastest players in the country. Jaquez Petaway has done some nice things. He's a former top 100 recruit in the country. OU wide receivers coach Emmett Jones has done a good job of cultivating depth in that room. So, I mean, it doesn't feel like you're up a creek without a paddle, but even so, you're going to be relying on a bunch of guys that haven't done a whole heck of a lot yet at the collegiate level. So tall task for this offense, tall task for Michael Hawkins, and you're going to have to eat the elephant one bite at a time, right, Chris? Like, you're not going to be able to rely on big chunk plays down the field, I think, to win you this football game, because you have big play threats, don't get me wrong, but Deion Burks ain't walking through that door. You got guys that are still inexperienced. You got a quarterback that, talented as he may be, he's still relatively inexperienced, at least at this level. And so I think what's going to be important early in the game is that the Sooners just get him in a rhythm, have him make some of those short intermediate throws that are going to be confidence builders, get him juiced up, get him feeling like, all right, this is an environment in which I can thrive despite the circumstances. And then from there, you'd hope things open up a little bit more for that offense.
Parker, you already mentioned key to the game in regards to winning the turnover battle, which I would agree with you, setting up the offense with short fields. You mentioned a great equalizer in this football game. That's probably what it's going to be. Brent Venables and Zach Alley dialing some things up, confusing Quinn Ewers, getting that offense off rhythm, and again, forcing some turnovers. I want to more so ask you this, though, Parker. You know, this game – Oklahoma's had a lot of success in this rivalry. I don't know if people really realize it. I know that's something that bothers OU fans. We even saw it at SEC Media Days when people are talking about Texas and they're not going to run they're not going to run the SEC like they ran the Big 12, and Oklahoma fans are shouting from the mountaintops. They didn't run the Big 12. We did. I don't know why I thought that was so funny. But the point I'm trying to make, Parker, is this. You know, Brent Venables in year 3. Obviously, he is the long-term guy, and I think that is a smart decision, the extension they gave him in the offseason. How important is this game to a coach's trajectory at Oklahoma? I don't know that it's something, obviously, the Sooners have ever really had to face because you guys have had a lot of success in this rivalry. But, like, for example, Ohio State-Michigan, we know that it doesn't matter how many games you win. If you're losing to the arch rival, at some point that takes a toll. The Iron Bowl, Bama-Auburn, same thing, right? Like at some point, hey, you better not lose to your rival too much or the rumblings are going to start. Like even with the 2-touchdown underdog status and the status of the two teams, how important would you say, Parker, is this game? We know what it means for the fans, but for the program moving forward and the trajectory, how important is this contest for a guy like Brent Venables and building his program there in Norman?
Oh, it's hugely important. Because, I mean, you don't have to go any further back than the early 90s with Gary Gibbs when he was the head coach at Oklahoma. Gary Gibbs had modest success. He inherited Barry Switzer's old job, right? So those are big shoes to fill. But Gary Gibbs had modest success as a head coach. Where he fell out of favor with the fan base and ultimately met his demise at Oklahoma was he couldn't beat Texas. And really the only coach in the history of the program that had that issue, could not beat Texas. And so – yeah, ultimately the bill comes due if you can't win this game year in, year out. And I think everybody has given Venables a mulligan for year 1 because they understand the circumstances that were at play in that football game and the reality that there just wasn't anyone who could throw a half-decent football on the roster because of the total overhaul that they'd had to do in the offseason. And they'd staked a lot their hopes that year to Dylan Gabriel. And when you don't have Dylan Gabriel available, I mean, you kind of saw what the alternative was, and the alternative wasn't great. They didn't have General Booty available for that game either. He had an allergic reaction the morning of. I don't know how many people know that. He would have played, probably would have started that game, but had an allergic reaction of all things and was unavailable. So outside of that, man, obviously you won a very climactic game as an underdog in 2023. This is pivotal, though. I think because, and somebody said it on Twitter the other day, it's 100% true. The SEC sticker being associated with this game doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot because this could be a MAC game. And it would mean just as much to these two fan bases, these two programs. And obviously nationally, it would mean just as much to college football for the historic rivalry series that it is. But man, I think this particular game is so important because, again, every single year, because this game falls right about the midpoint of the season for these two teams, generally what's going to happen is the victor is going to walk out of the Cotton Bowl with a ton of momentum that'll be able to carry over the remainder of the way. And the loser is going to walk out with some soul searching to do. And it may take a toll. You may come out sluggish. I mean, we've seen it happen. For instance, going back to 2021, I believe Oklahoma was 5-0 coming into that game. Texas was 4-1. Oklahoma gets the performance of a lifetime from Caleb Williams in the second half of that game, digs out of a 21-point hole, wins 55-48 in comeback fashion. Texas was 4-1 coming into that game. They finished that season 5-7. So you lose a game like that, it can torpedo your season. There is so much emotion wrapped up in this contest. There is so much emotion wrapped up in the 60 minutes of action that will take place in the Cotton Bowl on Saturday. And so, especially because the SEC schedule the rest of the way for Oklahoma is so unforgiving a victory here, I think, would do wonders for this team's confidence level, that sense of internal belief. Hey, we can go and we can beat a team like Ole Miss in Oxford, just like Kentucky did. We can go and beat a team like Missouri in Columbia, especially after the way that Texas A&M handled them. But conversely, if you get handled in this football game, if Texas wins and or covers, and they really leave no doubt that, yeah, we are the number one team in the nation. Well, if you're Oklahoma and you end up on the losing side, especially with all of the health issues that plague your program right now, then that doubt begins to set in. It maybe not internally, and even if it does, they never acknowledge it, right? But among the fan base, the perception is going to be, well, can we really trust this Oklahoma team to put up a fight in Oxford? Can we really trust OU to go on the road to Columbia and win? Can we trust them to go on the road final week of the season to Baton Rouge and hang with LSU? I think so much of the narrative surrounding Oklahoma football the rest of the way is riding on the outcome of this game. And the confidence level of an entire fan base is going to swing drastically one way or the other based upon what happens this weekend.
Parker, the vibes are up and the horns are down in Norman this week. Safe to say, as is every day. Parker Thune, OU insider, the Rivals affiliate for the Sooners. Also, he is a radio voice on the Ref in Norman, Oklahoma. Does a fantastic job with those guys and also doing the pregame football show for Oklahoma every single weekend. Parker, appreciate you taking the time. For those that don't know, I just mentioned, but let folks know where they can find all your great work.
Follow me on Twitter at Parker Thune. That's the easiest way to stay up to date with what I'm doing. And on my Twitter page, you'll find links to anything and everything you need links for to stay up to date with everything that I'm doing professionally.
Parker, you're the man. Appreciate you taking the time. Enjoy the game in Dallas, and we'll talk to you soon.
No, you know I will, Chris. Take it easy. Have a great weekend.